There are small moments in life that make us pause, silent, as if the world is whispering something. A quiet morning, a soft breeze, the sudden flutter of a bird. And suddenly, a strange question rises from within. Is there something deeper, wider, waiting to be discovered? This feeling is not loud. It pulses like a different rhythm beneath the familiar beat of daily life. Something ancient yet strangely new, as if it has just awakened from a long sleep. And from that one small moment a journey begins, not a journey to a distant temple or a sacred mountaintop, but a journey inward to the most familiar place of all, the self. Many carry questions that haven't yet taken form. Why does the feeling of separation still linger? Why has the sacred become so distant in the midst of modern life? Is it truly possible to touch the peace that so many before us have spoken of? In today's video, we'll be invited into a new perspective, one that asks for no blind belief, no rejection of what we already hold, but simply invites the opening of a deeper awareness. Each passage, each image, each idea shared will serve as a small key, gentle but capable of unlocking something profound. And if there's a subtle stirring in your heart, even the faintest vibration, hold on to it. It may be the sign that this journey began long ago and has simply been waiting for a quiet invitation to continue. For hundreds of years, the concept of the Second Coming has served as a spiritual anchor for countless generations. The image of a savior descending from the sky, bringing miracles and salvation, has been deeply embedded in Western culture. A promise that the light would come from the outside. This belief offers hope, but it has also, perhaps unintentionally, led people to keep looking upward and forget to look toward the very place where life is already breathing, within themselves. Interestingly, this belief is not universal. In India, enlightenment is seen as a quiet flame already burning inside each person, simply waiting to be awakened. In ancient Egypt, the soul was regarded as a being capable of ascending through levels of consciousness, not by any external hand, but through inner transformation. In Greece, philosophy emphasized that to know thyself is the path that opens the door to the divine. Many ancient civilizations agreed, if any sacred return were to happen, it would begin within the human soul. When we place these perspectives side by side, a gentle truth emerges. The more we search for answers outside, the further we drift from our own capacity to evolve. Hope placed solely in a single savior can turn spirituality into a passive waiting, as if the sacred were always just out of reach. And it is in this very moment that another doorway opens. A question long buried beneath tradition becomes suddenly clear. If we turned our gaze inward instead, what would change in how we understand the sacred return? This shift in direction leads us directly into the next level of awareness, where the true essence of Christ consciousness begins to reveal itself. When we look back at the flow of history, it becomes clear that the original teachings of the ancient world did not simply disappear. They were edited, repackaged, and in some cases entirely removed from the broader narrative, especially during the time when the Roman Empire began merging religious and political power. One of the most defining moments was the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, where selected texts were compiled to form the official biblical canon. Writings that carried messages of inner liberation, such as the Gnostic Gospels, were gradually pushed to the margins. Among those texts, the Gospel of Thomas offers a perspective that still stirs hearts today. The kingdom is inside of you, a phrase so simple, yet so powerful. It points to a truth that the sacred does not reside in external rituals or structures, but waits to be recognized within each person's consciousness. And that is precisely why teachings like these became difficult to accept for empires that sought to control the collective mind. When political power merges with spiritual authority, messages that empower the individual are often suppressed or softened, not because they lack truth, but because they threaten the stability of hierarchical systems. Over the centuries, this led to a kind of collective forgetting, a gap in memory around our innate capacity to access the sacred directly. And yet, the fragments of history remain, scattered but present, enough to remind us that a deeper layer of meaning is still waiting to be seen again. When the door to the past opens in this way, a natural question begins to arise. If so many early teachings pointed inward, then what is the true nature of Christ consciousness? That question leads us forward, into the next stage of awareness, and into the deeper unfolding of the journey within. When we look deeper into the ancient teachings, one truth gradually comes into focus. Christ was never meant to be a personal name. It was a title, a symbolic designation for the elevation of consciousness. The Anointed One did not refer to just one individual, but to a state of being that any human could reach when the mind, heart, and awareness fully open as one. This image is like a subtle frequency that surrounds human life. And when that frequency is touched, our view of ourselves and the world is entirely transformed. Across other wisdom traditions, this concept has also been expressed in beautifully similar ways. In Sufism, there is fana, the dissolving of the ego into the divine presence. In Buddhism, the state of non-duality is when the boundary between the observer and the observed completely disappears. Kabbalah speaks of Ein Sof, the infinite light that can be accessed through inner purification. Though the language differs, they all point to the same core experience, a profound recognition of the interconnectedness of all life. But over the centuries, misunderstandings emerged as the image of Christ became tightly bound to a specific religious system. In doing so, this concept was often narrowed, as if it referred only to one person, when in truth its original meaning was far more expansive. When we see Christ as a state of consciousness, the door to understanding opens wider, revealing that this potential is not beyond reach. And from this perspective, a natural question arises. If Christ consciousness is a state anyone can access, what actually happens in the body and mind when this frequency awakens? That question leads us forward into the next chapter, where science and spirit begin to meet. When the idea of a sacred frequency is viewed through the lens of science, the picture becomes far more relatable. In recent years, neuroscience research in the US has begun to explain why deep states of consciousness can bring about such profound feelings of connection, peace, and clarity. In long-term meditators, scientists have recorded the presence of synchronized gamma waves, a type of brainwave linked to unified perception and heightened awareness. It functions like a delicate harmony, where brain regions that typically operate in isolation suddenly begin to work together in rare and rhythmic coherence. In the realm of the heart, studies by the HeartMath Institute have shown that feelings of love, gratitude, and peace can create what's called heart-brain coherence, a state in which the heartbeat and brain activity move in remarkable harmony. In those moments, the body not only relaxes, it enters another kind of intelligence where clarity and intuition become more vivid than ever. The polyvagal theory adds yet another important layer. It reveals that when we shift out of survival mode, where the nervous system is constricted and hypervigilant, and into safety and connection mode, emotional and cognitive expansion happens naturally. This is also when the mirror neuron network activates powerfully, allowing us to feel one another's emotions as if the boundary between self and other begins to dissolve. In those moments of deep empathy, we experience living proof that separation is often just a symptom of a stressed mind. When we place the fear frequency and love frequency side by side, the contrast becomes unmistakable. One constricts the nervous system, the other expands it. And as the inner system begins to open, another question seems to arise on its own. Could the sacred symbols that have appeared throughout history be pointing to this same inner journey? This connection leads us into the next chapter, where ancient symbols are re-examined in an entirely new light. When we look back at the ancient civilizations, it becomes clear that sacred symbols were not created merely for decoration or to display power. They were subtle maps, visual guides that illustrated the stages of inner transformation through universally recognizable forms. Take the cross, for example, a symbol that predates Christianity by many centuries. In various traditions, the intersection of two lines was seen as the meeting point between the material and the spiritual, just like the crossing of space and time on a coordinate axis. It serves as a reminder that we are always living between two currents, one moving upward, the other outward, and that consciousness itself is the point of convergence. The Ankh from ancient Egypt carries a similar meaning. Its key-like shape, with the circle atop a vertical stem, represents life beyond the physical body. It describes a continuous cycle of consciousness where life does not end, it only transforms. The Egyptians believed that those who held this key understood how the soul evolves through multiple planes of existence. The caduceus, now widely recognized as a symbol of modern medicine, was once a sacred image depicting two serpentine energy currents winding upward along the spine. They spiral and intersect, ascending like streams of light. In many traditions, this symbol mirrors the path of awareness rising toward awakening, much like Kundalini energy in India. In Kabbalah, the Tree of Life presents yet another map, one that charts the journey from ordinary consciousness to divine union. Each branch, each intersection represents a stage of inner development, a step on the path of soul evolution. Over time, many have mistakenly believed that these symbols belonged solely to specific religions. But in truth, they were once tools, designed to help humans look inward and study the architecture of their own being. And when we string these pieces together, a gentle question arises. If all these ancient symbols are describing the inner journey, what actually happens when that transformation begins within a human being? That question leads us onward into the next chapter, where inner rebirth is explored through the lens of ancient mysticism. In many ancient traditions, the image of the human being does not stop at flesh and bone. There is always a deeper layer, a body of light that the soul may take on when consciousness reaches a more refined frequency. In ancient Egypt, the concept of Sahu referred to the glorious body, a luminous form the soul wears after undergoing purification and transformation. It was not simply the soul leaving the body, but a new radiant state of existence freer from physical limitations. In Tibetan tradition, stories of the rainbow body speak of practitioners who, after years of deep spiritual practice, begin to dissolve into light at death, leaving behind only hair and nails. In India, the term Divya Deha, the body of divine light, describes a form so saturated with sacred consciousness that it becomes a transparent channel through which that light can shine. Looking at the story of Jesus' transfiguration in the Gospels, where his face shines and his clothing becomes radiant like light, we begin to see this not just as a miracle, but as a living example of transfiguration, a transformation of one's entire state of being. This is very different from the idea of resuscitation, which merely brings a dead body back to biological function. Here, the old form is not restarted, a new level of presence is revealed. The detail that Mary Magdalene did not immediately recognize Jesus after the resurrection becomes easier to understand in this light. It's not that his form completely changed, but his energy field, his frequency, his way of being present had shifted, and the old perception could not immediately grasp a newly awakened embodiment of the same soul. When we put these pieces together, resurrection begins to appear not as the repair of a physical body, but as a shift in perception, an upgrade in the way one inhabits reality. And if this transformation was never meant to be reserved for one extraordinary person, then a natural question arises. How does an ordinary human being begin to awaken this frequency within their own nervous system and breath each day? That question opens the doorway to the next part of the journey, where the awakening of the inner Christ becomes tangible, practical, and closer than ever before. As the ideas of higher consciousness become clearer, the next question naturally turns toward practice. How can the body and nervous system begin to open to this frequency? Gently, safely, and naturally. Ancient traditions have long emphasized that awakening does not happen in a rush. It begins through subtle, tender contact with the breath and the felt sense of the body. One of the most accessible gateways is through 3 gentle breathing techniques that help shift the nervous system from stress to relaxation. 1. Breathing in softly. Inhale as if welcoming a warm breeze, light, soft, and effortless. 2. Prolonged exhale. Lengthen the breath out to signal to the body that no danger is present. 3. Box breathing. Inhale, hold, exhale. Hold in a steady rhythm, allowing the mind to gradually settle. Follow this with heart-focused breathing for about 5 minutes. Place your attention at the center of your chest and breathe as if your heart is slowly expanding with each breath. Studies show that when this area stabilizes, the nervous system begins to enter a state of safety and connection, opening the gateway to deeper awareness. Then comes somatic awareness, feeling the body as a container, a quiet home for your consciousness. This helps the mind loosen its grip on fantasy and return to the simplicity of sensation. Just by noticing the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, or the area below your navel, the body begins to remember its natural stability. A form of micro-meditation can also be powerful. Bring gentle attention along the length of your spine and sense a thin line of light rising from the base to the crown of your head. There's no need to visualize in detail, just sensing the subtle motion is enough. As the body becomes familiar with this inner quiet, a progressive activation may begin, from root to heart to crown, appearing as soft movements of energy. Every practice should unfold slowly, to avoid overstimulation. Gentleness is always safer than force. When the breath, heart, and spine begin to harmonize in this way, a natural question arises. If the inner activation of one individual can shift their entire presence, what happens when this begins to ripple across a whole community? That question leads the journey into the next chapter, where personal awakening meets the movement of collective humanity. When transformation takes place within a single person, it does not remain contained within that individual alone. In nature, all systems have a tendency to synchronize with the strongest, most stable frequency. This phenomenon is called entrainment, a physical law that can be observed in the simplest of experiments. Pendulum clocks hanging on the same wall eventually begin to swing in unison. Hundreds of flickering LED lights, at first chaotic, gradually start blinking in perfect rhythm. There is no force, only resonance. When groups meditate together, researchers have noticed a similar phenomenon occurs in the brain. Their brain waves begin to synchronize, especially in moments of deep stillness. This shared coherence not only creates a sense of collective peace, but also opens a field where each person's presence supports the others. The Princeton Global Consciousness Project also observed unusual shifts in random number generators around the world during times when large portions of humanity focused their attention on a single global event. It suggests that collective consciousness may be able to influence the shared energy field around us. Some scientists call this the informational field, where emotions and intentions form waves that ripple through space. The critical mass theory by Everett Rogers offers a sociological perspective. When a large enough portion of a population changes its habits or mindset, that shift spreads rapidly, like a chain reaction. What once seemed like personal awakening begins to reveal itself as the movement of a collective. A common misunderstanding is to see awakening as an isolated journey, like a lone candle in the dark. But in truth, each awakening is a point of light in a vast web. and the light of one can quietly ignite the one next to it. When one person expands their heart and their awareness, that shift subtly travels along invisible threads that science is only just beginning to explore. And as this picture becomes clearer, a gentle question emerges. If the inner awakening of one person can ripple outward this far, what might happen if all of humanity began to open to that same level of awareness? That question leads us into the next chapter, where the idea of return is seen in a completely new light. When we look back at the full journey of human consciousness, the image of the second coming begins to take on a meaning vastly different from the familiar narrative. No longer is it a vision of a divine figure descending from the sky, nor a global religious event broadcast live to the world. Instead, the return is unfolding in a quieter, deeper way, within each individual, each community, each system that is beginning to transform. At the heart of this shift is the journey from ego identity, where all experience is filtered through separation and defense, to unity identity, where awareness expands to perceive the deep interconnectedness of all life. As perception changes, so too do our actions, our choices, and the world we co-create. The signs of this movement are appearing everywhere. Compassion is rising, seen in how people care for others and extend concern beyond personal interests. Mental health, meditation, and mindfulness are no longer fringe practices, but increasingly common pathways to inner balance. At the same time, old models of control in governance, education, and the workplace are being challenged and dismantled, making way for values of freedom, transparency, and collective well-being. Placed side by side, these threads begin to weave a new image of the second coming, not as a divine interruption from above, but as a collective transformation rising quietly from within. It is not something that descends, it is something that emerges. And as this awareness spreads, another question begins to unfold. If the return is happening through us, what awaits at the far edge of this journey? That question leads us into the final chapter, where Christ consciousness becomes something we may embody in every moment of everyday life. As the journey reaches its final stretch, Christ consciousness is no longer a distant state to admire or a mystical concept to analyze. It becomes something tangible, something that can be touched through the small, steady choices of everyday life. These practices require no complex rituals. They arise in how we meet each moment. One of the clearest signs is compassion, the ability to witness another's struggle without judgment. Alongside it stands courage, the willingness to act from truth, even when the world may not yet agree. Presence becomes a sacred act, when the mind no longer runs to past or future but rests fully in the here and now. Kindness and the capacity to listen deeply nurture a quiet thread of connection, and integrity, living in alignment, allows our actions and values to merge naturally. In a world so often shaped by fear, peace is not about escape. It is about learning to move through fear with awareness. The breath becomes a silent companion, reminding the body that it is still safe. Intention acts as the compass behind every small choice, and mindfulness turns each step on the earth into a place where awareness can return to its original clarity. Over time, these practices become the embodiment of the Christ frequency in everyday life. Not through belief, but through being. It is not the words, but the way we live that carries the message most clearly. And if something shared here has stirred a quiet resonance within you, then perhaps this final message is the bridge that connects it all. If this message awakens something in you, let it awaken someone else through you.